Today on the Modern Motherhood Podcast, I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and my guest today has great ideas, not just how to make your marriage good, but how to make it fierce. Today, I welcome Selena Frederick. So welcome to the show today, Selena.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So give us a little bio on you, on your husband, Ryan, and what your lives are like right now.
Yeah, we got married at the ages of 20 and 21. So we're going on about 15 years of marriage. We kind of did our own thing, did college, worked. He started a few of his own businesses. And then we launched Fierce Marriage about 10 years into our marriage. That was kind of when God impressed it on our hearts and felt like, okay, we've got a little bit of time under our belt to maybe talk about it. We both have, of course, we have two daughters. One's 4 and one is almost 2. So they're busy. And I'm basically, I stay at home with the kids and work with them. And then we do Fierce Marriage. And that is kind of our lives right now.
How did marriage become kind of the lane in which you felt called to speak? Because, there are lots of different aspects of faith, different niches that the Lord calls each of us to weigh in on. How did marriage become the thing in the center of your radar?
Sadly, I'd say about 5 to 8 years into our marriage, we had a lot of friends that were kind of divorcing and remarrying, and sometimes a few times. And it seemed like it was a kind of a theme in some of the friendships that we had at that time in our community. And we were just kind of scratching our heads saying, why are we still together? What is going on in our marriage, or what is God doing? And honestly, we just boiled it down to Jesus. And also this, we can't really do it without him. And he was the glue that has really stuck us together. He's the reason why we're together still. Without him and understanding his love and his covenant with us, it's hard to live with someone else, let alone, be so intimate and married and have conversations and deal with all the things that this life is filled with without Jesus. And, not to say that God can't redeem a marriage or you can have another marriage from a divorce, because he is sovereign and he is good. And that was just kind of our experience that we were seeing. And we're wondering what is going on. Why are we still married? Why do we still love each other and enjoy being together? And it's not without problems or conflict, of course, but that was kind of where it started birthing out. And we just started praying about it. And we're like, okay, what's in our hands? What could God use? And we felt like our marriage was a bit unique in how young we got married and how we're still together and still love each other very much and enjoy each other's friendship and company and all of that.
So give us a snapshot of kind of a state of the union today on marriages. What do you, since you're deep into this lane, what are the statistics?
Oh gosh.
What are you seeing within a faith community? How are marriages doing? Because, we hear the statistics that a lot of times Christian marriages have the same, divorce rates and all kinds of things that as do secular marriages. So is that what you're seeing? And how do you interpret that?
I feel like even though we're in this marriage lane pretty deep, I do feel that we are, I know all of the marriages to be able to speak to it, but it seems from the feedback and from what we've experienced through Fierce Marriage, it's nothing new. It's what we call like a heart condition in our book. We talk about it through my husband's experience. He, at a young age, had to have heart surgery in our marriage. And so we say that we have this heart condition that we didn't know about. He was sick. And what we call it, we parallel it to sin and brokenness. And so we go into marriage and we're all excited about life and life together. And then there's this underlying, sin. The wedding day fades. You get through your first couple years and then it's like, oh, this person is like so messy and frustrating and I don't know what else to do. And so dealing with this heart condition, I think is still, it's just the human nature. And it's this theme that we are trying to understand how to love each other as Christ loves us. I feel like people want more of truth. Yes, we want like 5 steps, how to have a healthier marriage and all of that. But I think understanding the why behind that has come to the forefront of the whole marriage scene. Like yes, we can go and do all these actions, but it only lasts for so long. So how can I really experience change in my marriage? How can I really walk through conflict in a way where we are reconciling and not just trying to be right and trying to win a fight? Can I trust that my marriage is big enough to hold all these problems that we have to deal with, and that's the beauty of covenant and the way God designed it is that it is with him, it is. And so I think people really are trying to seek out the truth because they genuinely want their marriages to work. They want to be enjoying each other and they want to have the fulfillment. But there's just problems. And if you're not looking at it through a gospel lens or through a Christ-centered lens, I feel like marriage can be that much more challenging to be in. And so, behavior modification, taking a few steps here and there. We say it's like taking Tylenol for when you really need like a heart surgeon. You need the Savior to come in and do only the work that he can do, which is transforming hearts and healing hearts.
I like that you brought up that, a lot of the issues that we see in marriage today, that it's kind of the same core over and over, regardless of if you're living in the 21st century or if you were in the first or second century, that it's this condition of the heart. And yet, I will say, it seems to me that there are some unique challenges within our modern.
I agree.
When it comes to our romantic relationships and everything from work and online life and kids and on and on and on. So how do you find that we can help navigate some of those modern challenges and distractions to a marriage?
Yeah. No, I agree. I feel like there's a couple things that, of course, social media, it's kind of its own beast. And so this whole design of the internet coming forward is just, I feel like, drawing out more of those heart issues in different ways. Also priorities and like the busyness of this life definitely takes away from intentionality with your marriage and with your spouse and spending time together. And then of course, along with that is, you have all these modern and cultural beliefs versus God's word and what he says and living obediently. So living obediently and intentionally versus kind of distracted and half in, half out kind of everywhere. I think those are some of our newer challenges that we face, and we are busy with good things, but when it's taking away from kind of our first disciples and kind of the priorities that God has given us to steward over, like our husband, our wife, our kids, I think they need to be questioned in some ways. For many years, we were heavily involved in church, and we didn't see the toll it took on our marriage until like 5 years in. And we're like, we love each other, but we don't really see each other that much, And so it's like we're doing good things, but we're like, who is this person that I'm married to? Like, I see you at dinner and that's about it. And then we're off, And so, it's easy to become distracted. And, honestly, I think the enemy would have us live that way, live unintentionally. And before you know it, you're 85 years old and we've been on our phones the whole time or something, you know what I mean? Not to sound too harsh, but God is like, I have so much more for you to experience. Not that it's just a screen or a phone, but there's more to be had in this arena of marriage. And so I think that, things like social media have just projected things a little bit more. I mean, that's where we've seen more affairs happen and more somewhat like isolation too, and not being honest and real and transparent with each other because it's so easy to hide behind a little square picture, being transparent in an age where information is just available and still we find ourselves hiding. There's definitely some new dangers that we are facing. And for us, again, that's been, I feel like, distracted and unintentional living. We need to prioritize and in a different way, not just checking off a list, but really starting with the core and allowing Jesus to do what he's got to do and then radiating out from that.
You mentioned something that I think is really interesting. It's an interesting temptation that I think is new in marriages today. And I've seen it more and more. So I feel like it's a trend I'm seeing. Which is, back in the day, if you broke up with the high school boyfriend, the high school romance, and then, you went to college and he went to college and you moved to different towns and on, that was the end of the contact, right? I mean, that was, it ended. And if you were going to try to recontact that person, it would be through some really intentional means.
Right.
Today, I'm hearing a lot about spouses hitting a point in their marriages where they're frustrated, they feel like the romance is gone, whatever, and they circle back on social media. They're just going to take a look. They're just going to see how that previous relationship, how that person is doing.
Right.
And wow, I can't even tell you the number of times now I hear somebody who's gotten re-involved with someone from their past because social media has made it really easy
Yes.
and seemingly anonymous portal for
Right.
getting re-engaged.
Right.
There. So how do we fight some of those modern temptations within our marriage when we hit places of frustration or feeling a little bored or feeling like the romance is kind of gone? Like, what are some things that you think Jesus would have us do in terms of dealing with those kinds of temptations?
Yeah. One of the biggest things for us has been community, the people that we are doing life with and being known by. So allowing yourself to be known by people that you trust and that you trust Jesus in them, to know like, hey, we're struggling in our marriage. Like we're having a hard time connecting. Like, this past summer, Ryan and I had just a hard time. It felt like a couple months that and we don't have hard times like that, and I think sometimes God allows us to walk through those to be able to experience them in new ways and experience his glory in new ways. But we talked to our community group. We were like, I don't know what's going on, and they'll lovingly question and they'll lovingly pray for us and they'll speak truth and love to us. And that, God does his work through relationships and through people, and how good of him to do that, and so having people that and that know you is very, very important. And as far as social media goes, just talking, tangibly, we know each other's, passwords. We can get on each other's account anytime. We have like the phone drop test. Like if I were to drop my phone and he looked at it, he could see everything, and that's fine. Like that's how we live. We live kind of this theme of doors open, windows open, lights on, like everything is out there for you to see and pick at, whatever. And, when the frustrations come and you want to start kind of stalking your old high school sweetheart, or you want to take a peek at what they're doing, that really is stepping into sin. And sin is a slippery slope. And, it takes you further than you want to go. It costs more than you want to pay, and it hurts deeper than you can even imagine, and so I caution people, again, when that community is there and the conversations are, I'm having trouble with my marriage. Oh, I was on Facebook and saw somebody doing blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why were you on Facebook? Like looking at his profile, and questioning my sister in Christ's heart out of love. And we can do that because, again, we have that relationship. So again, transparent living with your community and with each other has been huge for us. Also, just being very vulnerable with each other and intentional. So when you're feeling those things, bringing that to your spouse. And yes, it's probably going to hurt a little bit, but if you say, a lot of times, I've gone to Ryan, not necessarily in this area, but maybe I've spent money on something that we didn't really talk about. That's a good one for me. That's happened a few times. And I have to go to him and say, you know what? I'm sorry. I spent this money and this is why. And I'm sorry because I feel like God helps me understand, why am I spending this? I was trying to keep up with so-and-so. I wanted to just feel good in this new pair of shoes or something. And not that that's bad, but like, where's my heart issue if I'm going against, my husband and I's vision and our covenant to each other? And so going to them transparently, again, in light of the gospel, we can do this with each other. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's freedom to be had on the other side of that. And there's joy to be had. And there's a deeper relationship and experience to be had. We did a 31-day pursuits book. We wrote that. So 31 days pursuing your husband and 31-day pursuit of your wife. And we did it through a group online as well. And one of the wives shared that she had a one-night stand with an old friend, and she was terrified and she wanted prayer. And of course we prayed. And then she said that she told him. And of course there was kind of a big bomb going off, and then the smoke settled. And they have been talking through it all. And she's like, I've been living with this burden for years, and I thought I would take it to my grave. And now, like, the Lord has led me in this. He's led my husband, and we are united. And it's not perfect yet, but it's better than it's ever been, and God is like, he's come to save us. He's come to give us freedom, and so again, transparent living, sometimes we think it's a burden or it's a chain, and it's like, no, transparent living offers so much freedom and depth.
Back to our conversation with Selena about making your marriage fierce. But I've got a quick thought for you about helping take care of a child in need. Back to school season to me really feels like New Year's. It's a chance to hit the reset button on some goals and routines we'd been so well intentioned about back in January, but then you know how it goes. So let's make good on all those things we said we were going to do this year, like sponsoring a child in need through Compassion International. It couldn't be easier. It costs just a little over $1 a day, and it only takes a couple of minutes. Just go to compassion.com/allmomdoes. And I was on your website trolling around, fearlessmarriage.com, and you have so many great posts there, so much great information. And there was a line that stood out to me. You said, "Is it me, or is marriage just another word for endlessly learning to communicate?" So talk to us about that. I mean, how do you navigate the frustration of feeling like you're not making progress in the communication lane, or feeling like, I thought we already had this conversation
right
8 times? So talk about that.
Yeah, communication we've learned so much more than the words coming out of your mouth. It's about what's being heard or perceived by you and your spouse. Like for wives, I tend to hear what Ryan's saying through how I'm feeling, which is not always great. So he can be saying one thing, and what he's saying, I feel something and I react, and he's like, wait, that's not what I was trying to say. You're responding wrong. This is not where we're trying to go. I mean, we're 15 years into this, and we're still, you still have communication hiccups. Plus when, life just happens and disconnection happens, it's a hard thing. And so for us, we really try to ask each other, okay, pause, like, what is the real issue going on here? I know that you're mad at me because I didn't take the garbage out like I said I would. But I feel like you're really mad at me. Like you've just been stewing, Ryan's had these conversations. Like, I feel like you've really just been stewing down here. What's going on in your heart? I feel like there's more to this than just me not taking the garbage out or something, and there's these communication just hiccups where we're just not connecting. When a minor issue really is rooted in a major issue, again, that's a place where we can really love each other and extend some grace and say, okay, I know we're not communicating well. Let's take a step back. And part of it, I feel like, is knowing yourself too. Like I've learned about myself, I don't respond well, immediately to conflict or anything. Like when he's trying to communicate something and I feel defensive, I have to pause, because I will react emotionally and then I will have to apologize for that later. So for me I know that I have some triggers. So I need to take a step back. I need to think about what I need to say. It's getting faster. God is sanctifying me every day. But I have to search my own heart and say, what's the real issue here? Why am I really responding this way? For Ryan, when we aren't communicating well, a lot of it sometimes is that we just haven't been intimate too. We haven't had sex. And sometimes you just need to connect that way in order to get past some of this communication barriers, which stinks sometimes because the one thing you don't want to do is to do. And so that can be really challenging to do. But again, communicating in love and in a way that is allowing the other person to feel vulnerable and be safe, and saying, it's okay for you to be transparent with me. Like, I love you. I'm on your side. We're on the same team. Like, let's talk this through. And just getting to that point can be hard, and that's okay. Like, God is faithful to lead us to each other and to lead us in Him. And so I think trusting in that has helped our communication. For the most part, we've learned to fight faster. We know how to communicate faster through things. And because we've spent so much time together, which can be, on the flip side, not a good thing, is we know how to affirm each other. We know how to love on each other and, uplift each other. But we also know how to push each other's buttons without saying a word,
Right.
Get so familiar with that in marriage. So again, navigating those frustrating feelings, it's really kind of laying your heart before the Lord and saying, okay, why are we having these issues, God? What's going on? Is our schedule too busy? Have we not been intimate? Is there something going on in my husband's world that I don't know about? Have I asked him lately, what's going on at work? How are you feeling about things? Just kind of lovingly prodding and asking questions, not interrogating them, but just lovingly kind of checking in with them really opens the doors, and I think allows your spouse to kind of exhale and say, oh, this is what's been happening. This is what's been going on in my life and in my heart. And I'm sorry I haven't shared it with you, or whatever, however they process that. But I think if you can get to that point of, again, just loving and extending grace and asking some deeper questions, that's really gotten us through. And trusting that your covenant, is holding true, even if you're having a few days of not being able to communicate well with each other, that, it's not the end. This is just a little phase you got to get through. And probably on the other side, you'll learn something and talk about it, and it'll be even better. So
right. And I think you hit on something that's really interesting and really key, because I think with the best of intentions, but as people of faith, we're almost trying to separate sometimes the physicality of our marriages with the communication and the spiritual side and all of that. And so I really think it's so important to remember that, all the communication doesn't have to be in place. All the feelings don't have to be lovely in order to stay connected physically. And it is one of the places that I think sometimes we're very guilty of jettisoning that first because we're so irritated or mad or frustrated or whatever. We don't feel like being intimate. And yet the longer that goes on, it's a trend that I see ministerially that is of concern to me. The number of Christian marriages I'm encountering that are sexless, and people think that's fine. And I'm like, how have we gotten to this place, this gift of God, that somewhere we have almost like the Gnostics and the Essenes, right? They were a group of believers in the early days who began to really eschew the physical experience of the body, to see it as something horrible and other, and yet not celebrate it as God's creation. And I sometimes think we're seeing that in some of our Christian marriages and almost taking a pride in it. Like, we're so spiritual that, all these things have to be just right in order for the sexual experience to take place. Are you seeing some of that trending as well?
I do see that. I do see people hiding and not wanting to share what's really going on. For me personally, I've seen most of the abstaining, I guess, happening because of hurt, because of busyness. I'm not sure about as much in the church just because we haven't been in that arena quite as much in terms of like leadership, but we have experienced a lot of people who are like, I don't remember the last time we had sex. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Sorry. How are you still functioning with this person? I mean, I get it. It's a hard, there are situations where there's even things like behavioral health. There's things that, we don't understand about other people's relationships, but God designed sex and intimacy for so many reasons. We just did a podcast on like the 3 purposes for sex and talking about how it's for procreation, but it's also for us to enjoy and experience a oneness. I think Tim Keller talks about how even in the most rapturous is the word he uses, the most rapturous moment of intimacy, that's like a sliver of a glimpse of the unity, within the Trinity and within how we will have oneness with Jesus when he comes again and we are reconciled with him. And so there's all this eternal purpose and there's this eternal work that's happening that God allows us even to experience this side of heaven through intimacy and sex. And it's not just a physical like release or anything like that. There's depth to be had. There's intimacy. There's emotions and everything that you kind of feel like you need to, you're like, why aren't we connecting? Why aren't we doing that? And it's like, just have sex and communicate with each other through it. And I'm not saying, again, there's a lot of other issues that can be brought into a marriage. And that's, if there's been abuse in the past or if there's been trust issues and infidelity, there's things that we all have to work through. But knowing that God designed it for our enjoyment, for our flourishing, for us to experience a unification so intimately is something to be celebrated, and not swept under the rug or, not hidden and not that you need to share your sex life on social media, of course not. But you know what I'm saying? Just kind of sharing why it's good. We didn't have sex until we got married, we abstained. And that was a transition for me personally because it wasn't bad. Like sex wasn't bad. It wasn't taught to be bad, but it's hard to say, oh, here's this fruit and it's so good, but you have to wait. Like you hear it's so good, but you can't like jump into all the details of, how it's good. And so I think that was a transition on a lot of levels for me to say, okay, sex is good. Like it's okay to enjoy it. It's okay to be adventurous as long as it's edifying for each of us and it's according to God's word and following kind of that path down it. I mean, it took a few years, to be honest, to be fully okay with that understanding in my heart,
I do think it's a good place too to just remind people that if you are in a situation, obviously we seem to know, well, man, if communication's not working well and we're really hitting a wall, perhaps we should get, a trusted pastor or counselor involved. Well, heavens, we can't seem to get to a place where, these fights reconcile and they seem to be speeding up. Maybe we need to get with someone. But, if you are existing in a marriage right now in which the physicality is missing and not missing because of a medical situation or because, you're in a high-risk pregnancy or something like that.
Right.
That is also a very important reason to get with a trusted and and wise counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And that, for some reason, seems to be one of the things we can be very hesitant about disclosing in marriage, and yet is a very important symptom of some things that might be going on that needs to be disclosed. Now, we have listeners out there, they may be solid in their faith journey and they want to have a really Jesus-centered marriage, but they may be married to someone that they're, the bus stop they're on in the faith journey may be a very different place. And, we always talk about in our faith communities, we want to be equally yoked. And we have those marriages that were not conceived in that place. One person was a person of faith, one was not. But I've also been encountering a lot of marriages too, where everybody started on the same page.
Right.
And then a spouse went, I don't know, this church thing, this Jesus thing, Sure. So what do we do for a marriage where each partner is not necessarily on the same page when it comes to relationship with God?
Well, first of all, keep praying for them, praying for their spouse, and again, having community pray with them as well. Some good friends of ours, they have such a great story. I mean, I love them, and they're pastors. They love the Lord. So they got married really young, and he was not quite into church. He knew she was, and she loved the Lord. They got married, and she was just like, why is he not coming to church with me? Like, why does he just want to sit on the couch, drink a beer, and watch football on Sundays? Like, I want him to come to church. I want him to experience Jesus in all of these ways. And I mean, this was, a year in their marriage, and she's just like, God, come on. Like, seriously, how can I get him to know you and love you and come to church with me? And she said, Selena, the Holy Spirit just spoke to me and was just like, go get him a beer and sit on the couch next to him. And she goes, I couldn't believe it. Like, it was clear as day. And I went to the fridge. I came home after church, went to the fridge, got him a beer, sat down and asked him what was the score. And he was so surprised and shocked by that whole situation that a few things transpired, but he went to church the next week with her, and a lot of what we can do is Jesus calls us to do this with people in our lives, but just meeting them where they're at, and not begging them, not pleading with them, but meeting them where they're at. I mean, that is such a way to intentionally love your spouse and be vulnerable with them and allow them to share and open up. Like, okay, why do you, if they left a church, why did you not like the church? Like, is there something that hurt you or that you disagree with? And not that you need to drive those conversations every single day, but I think just, again, meeting them where they're at, taking small steps, praying for them, and asking the Holy Spirit to lead and equip you on how to love them, as Christ loved the church. Truly, Jesus' love for us is one way. Like, we bring nothing but sin to the equation, and he loves us. He draws us in. He is faithful to work in us. And so if you are a wife loving a husband who is kind of stepped away or just doesn't want to do the Jesus thing, Jesus is so big in you, and continue to just be anchored in him, in your identity in him, and know that God is calling your husband. He loves your husband more than you could ever love him, and he wants to be in relationship with him. And so trusting that is a hard thing to do, I think, day in and day out. But I would just encourage you to continue trusting, continue praying, and meeting your husband where they're at, or whoever I'm talking to. I'm assuming it's mostly wives right now that are listening.
Right. There's a verse, and I'm probably going to butcher the address. I think it's 1 Peter 3:2. It might be 2 Peter 3:2. It just talks about, wives, win your husband without a word. And I think it's, by the integrity of your life, like how you're living out your faith experience. And I think that's so hard for us, particularly when we want to be able to connect on a communication level and express why this is important and why it's important to us that they would be walking in faith and all of those things. And yet I've had the experience with some people I was very close to, just watching the husband shut down and shut down and shut down every time the wife was talking. Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you coming to church? Why aren't you?
Yeah.
Really, frankly, was not until she finally shut up.
Yes.
that he began to hear God, ironically.
Yeah.
Refer to something that I think is interesting in your friends, her going and just sitting side by side and watching the game. Emerson Eggerichs talks about being shoulder to shoulder, with a spouse, and how that sometimes speaks even more powerfully than the things we're trying to say to each other's faces. So what are some healthy habits for your marriage? When you talk about wanting, a fierce marriage being fierce for your marriage, what are some fierce habits?
Well, I am actually going to, if you want to put them in the show notes, you can, but we have a gift to leave with the listeners or wherever. We have a book actually called 5 Healthy Habits for Your Marriage. It's the number 5habits.us. You can go and download that ebook. But that was from a post that was one of our most popular posts. And it talks about things, like praying for your spouse, praying with your spouse. If you do have that believer of a spouse, then, it's so important to pray for each other, to pray with each other. And then another thing was talk about important things together, have those hard conversations, communicate daily, more than just like, okay, how are you? Okay, bye. We do things like the heart check, which is what book is in your hand, what voice is in your ear, what is God stirring in your heart? Things like those. Highs and lows even are super easy too. Praying for each other out loud together. And another thing for us has been planning like a date and planning for time for intimacy, because that's hard, with kids and young kids, that's hard. That is very difficult to make happen. And so one of the biggest things that's helped us, honestly, is simple things like having a date night and saying, Grandma and Grandpa or babysitters, take the kids out. We're going to have dinner in or something like that, and not, of course, trying to make it awkward. But again, it's important to have those times of connecting and that are undistracted, no phones, no screens, just connecting with each other and making that time along the financial lines, because I think finances are a huge frustration in marriage. They can be a huge conflict arena. We have really, God, we felt like has helped us learn to live beneath our means. And so habitually, we have a family vision. So when is it enough? When are we making, enough money essentially? When is enough and why? And why are we spending our money, and talking about expenses after a certain price point? Why do we need this? Are we tithing? Are we reducing some of the expenses in our life? Or are we just spending money because we need to be a part of things and we want to have all the big things? And if you boil it down, we feel insecure if we don't. I mean, those are hard things to deal with. But again, living beneath our means and developing that habit of being okay with, the used car or the smaller house, because your quality of life is better. You're living more intentionally and on purpose. Again, being transparent with each other, developing a culture of transparency within your marriage. And, your kids will see that you're honest with each other. I think our kids pick up on how we're acting with each other versus what we're actually saying. And so living honestly and openly with each other is huge. And serving one another, practicing serving each other in small ways, big ways. Your spouse, what speaks to them. It doesn't have to be like this big drawn out, even dates for us are not huge and drawn out. Oftentimes they're like going to lunch and having, an hour or two to just kind of connect conversationally and talk to each other, see where each other's at. You get lost in this world of small children sometimes.
Yeah, you do. Right. Selena Frederick, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, Julie, thanks for having me. I feel so blessed to be on here.
It's awesome. Awesome to have you. You can find out more about Selena and Ryan and all they are doing to help couples make the most of their relationships at fiercemarriage.com. Hey, and please take a quick minute and subscribe and give a 5-star rating to the podcast. It helps others find the podcast and all the great wisdom and insight you hopefully are receiving each week. I'd love to connect with you. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Julie Lyles Carr and at julielylescarr.com. As always, I'm so very thankful for Donna Tody and Rebecca Beckett, our producer and our content coordinator. You'll find more ideas, inspiration, laughs, and insight at AllMomDoes.com. Next week, she tried to ignore her husband's porn addiction for years, but eventually all that denial came roaring to the surface. How did their marriage survive? My guest next week is Lynn Cherry, and her story of the addiction cycle that was destroying her marriage is one you don't want to miss. That's Lynn Cherry next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast. I'll see you then.